Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey everybody, this is the Digital Asset Investor, and I'm going to start with this golden clip, no pun intended. The guy that's going to be talking here, his name is Steve Hanke. He's a professor of applied economics at Johns Hopkins. I was actually talking to a guy the other day that was one of my son's Little League baseball coaches, and his son is playing football for Johns Hopkins. But anyway, listen to what he says here.
How do you see the role of gold and silver developing up ahead? We spoke briefly about a potential gold-backed BRICS currency. Do you think gold will ever return to the monetary system in some form or another? What do you make of central banks accumulating gold? And your thoughts on silver as well, if you have any.
Well, gold, as Nobel laureate, my good friend, the late Robert Mundell, said gold will always have a role in the international monetary system, and it does now. Your question is, well, is the role going to get bigger or smaller? I think it's probably going to get bigger, and in a way that's because of this reaction to the sanctions. Financial sanctions that have been associated with the United States and the European Union, by the way. But this weaponization of the dollar has opened the window a little bit for gold. So, and it depends on really what, for example, what BRICS, for example, does. If they actually did a gold-backed currency board the way I propose to do it, that means, by the way, what? That my draft law for this, I've actually drafted up a law for it and everything else. And it would be housed in Switzerland. It would be governed by Swiss law. The reserves would be held in Switzerland. And the board of the currency board would be a 5-member board. Only 2 of them, perhaps 3 maximum, would come from BRICS countries. The rest would be outside. For example, maybe one from Switzerland. Get a good neutral country. So if they would do that, gold would become a lot bigger in the picture. Fundamentally, the central banks are buying gold. I think fundamentally, I'm pretty bullish on gold. For that reason, among others, I think we're headed into a recession in the United States, and gold's always a good bet in a recession. Europe, by the way, thanks in part to their entanglement with the Ukraine war, it's starting to go into a recession. I mean, Germany is in a recession. Sweden has just tipped into a recession. And gold is always a good bet during a recession. And I think the U.S. will be in a recession next year. Silver is something, Jesse, I don't follow too carefully, so I don't really have any great thoughts about that.
All right, you know the drill. My new sponsor is Miles Franklin for physical gold, and this is what you do. Use the code DAI Gold, info@milesfranklin.com. You can email them or call 952-929-7006. I'm going to memorize that phone number before it's over. That's in the link in the description of this video too. For the best pricing, either email them or call them. That's what they told me. Check this out. This is a clip from Dark Horse, and I like this clip because it really lays out just how early we are in crypto and blockchain. And it draws the comparisons to things like email. I can remember, before you watch this, I can remember when email first, when it was first available, I think it was my second year in college. That would have been around 1993 or 4, somewhere in that range. They were the Auburn University where I went. They were asking. They were saying that you could get your Auburn University email address, and here's how you do it. And I remember talking to my friends and saying, "Why would I want one of those?" But this guy makes some really good points in this clip right here.
We are in the early stages of this technology, and I really want to provide some examples of that. It generally takes about 25 to 30 years for human beings to adopt a new data transfer technology. Radio was invented in 1890, but wasn't commercially available until the 1920s. TV was developed in the 1920s, but wasn't in homes until the 1950s. Email was invented in 1969, but most of you most likely didn't have an email address until 1997.
Email invented in 1969, and I was asking why I needed one of those in 1993 or 4. That's pretty unbelievable when you think about it.
There is one that I really want to focus on, and that's TCP/IP, which is the internet, for those that don't know. It was developed as a DARPA project in 1970, but it wasn't really commercially accepted until 1995 when it was rolled out with Windows 95. There's another important date, which is 1983. 1983 is when TCP/IP was accepted as the standard protocol for internet development, 13 years after it was created. Well, here we are, 13 years after Bitcoin was created, and we're just now starting to talk about standardization. This is not a coincidence. Adoption at this stage is not a technology problem, it's a human conditioning issue. Every 13-year-old in the United States has only existed in a world where Bitcoin has existed. 3 years from now, every 16-year-old will have only existed in a world where Bitcoin has existed. 16 years old is an important date because it's generally when someone becomes interested in becoming a developer. They are the adoption layer. We here in this room, we're the infrastructure layer. It's our responsibility to create an environment where every 13-year-old American has a framework upon which they can build the next world on. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
That's a pretty wild clip right there. Now, I want to show you this. Wheezy was putting this out yesterday. If you remember, Katie Hawn is the lady who was the assistant U.S. attorney that went after Ripple in 2015. I couldn't remember I didn't think I'd ever seen this clip. Listen to it.
So the question of what Ripple did to get in trouble is obviously a complicated question. But just a simple answer is we had been receiving information that Ripple...
No, by the way, we know for a fact that this is one of the guys that was involved in ETHgate. And I'm drawing a blank on his name right now, but he was there. He popped up everywhere. He's a Bitcoin maxi. He's been in the rooms of several of these meetings that have gone on over the years while all this was going on. And he's not a pro Ripple guy.
And of course, Ripple of 3 years ago is a very different company than Ripple Labs today. But we had received information as a government that Ripple Labs back in the day...
Received information from who? First question.
...have appropriate anti-money laundering or KYC, know your customer requirements in place or policies. And so to test that information, we actually did a series of undercover buys as a government.
When did Vitalik Buterin went there in 2013 to be an intern. It just didn't work out, and he left with the idea for smart contract platform. Let's remember that.
And I worked with Tigran on that case. And what we found through the undercover buys and the undercover agents were that they were able to move fairly significant amounts of money on the Ripple network without providing any identifying information of any kind, with just only an email address. And that caused a lot of concern for the government, given the significant amounts of money that was being moved. So that's one thing that prompted our investigation into Ripple Labs. And as I mentioned, it was a much different company. Back in those days, they didn't have an AML policy in place that they were following, and they didn't have a chief compliance officer.
And it took a while between the time of the investigation and the time of the, it's not prosecution, but of the settlement. Is that right?
That's right, Jerry, and I'm glad you said it's not a prosecution, because I think an important thing to realize here is people say, oh, it's a criminal prosecution. Actually, there was not a prosecution. There were no indictments handed down. It was a non-prosecution agreement. What happened to Ripple was a FinCEN enforcement action. So what we had with Ripple, our office had, was a settlement agreement. And it took a couple years.
So she tied them up for a couple of years on that, okay? And then they got tied up for almost 3 years on the SEC. The problem I have here is that she's dancing all around this whole Ethereum thing. First of all, she went to Andreessen Horowitz, and half of what they were investing in was Ethereum related and tokens and all this stuff. The other thing is she's never expressed any problem with AML where it concerns the famous clip of Joseph Lubin disguising whales, allowing people to buy Ethereum in the ICO and helping disguise the whales. All you had to have was an email address. She's never.
A person can buy from any number of different type entities.
All right, she never had a problem with that AML. Okay, she never referred this to her former. For some reason, she never felt it was important, because we've been playing this video for the last 2 years. She's never felt it important to refer this to her old buddies at the Department of Justice so that they can look into the AML issues here and put them through a 2-year investigation or whatever. Never felt a need to do that. Plus, here she is all in the ETHgate timeline on May 5th, 2015. That's when she settled with Ripple. Then she was sitting right in front of Jay Clayton the day before he goes over to Andreessen Horowitz to get Chris Dixon to lead up what would become the Ethereum Free Pass. He led up the Venture Capital Working Group. Then here, April 12th, 2018, in a Yahoo Finance article, she says that she had an occasion to meet with Jay Clayton at Stanford recently. We're not sure if she was referring to the January 24th back then, but right after the Bill Hinman speech, literally a few days after it, Andreessen Horowitz hires her to work with Chris Dixon, who's the same guy who met with Jay Clayton in the beginning, and they met Clayton told him to put together what became the Venture Capital Working Group, and his attorney, Lowell Ness at Andreessen Horowitz, went and wrote the safe harbor memo that only included Ethereum and got the Ethereum Free Pass. Then she spent the next 2 or 3 years with Andreessen Horowitz working with Chris Dixon, and they were doing all kinds of fun. She eventually left to go here. Whatever happened to Katie Haun and her 1.5 billion crypto fund? She's always been one of the characters in this whole drama that bothered me, because I always felt like, having been in the U.S. the Justice Department, she probably had a little more responsibility than some of the others involved. Apex Development Summit is going on in Amsterdam. Ripple always does things right. This looks like they're having a proper party in Amsterdam. Good for them. This is some more pictures I saw. And there's some of the people there. And I went to this when it was in Vegas. I guess, was that last year? It's really cool. Chris Larson popped up today and met a lot of nice people. Chris Larson popped up today, and we have the video receipts. Here he is.
Unfortunately, this administration made a really bad call.
At the city level or at the federal level?
At the federal level. They pretty much killed San Francisco from being what it was, the blockchain capital of the world. We owned it, and we don't anymore because the Biden administration, for whatever reason, decided they want to push this industry offshore. And so it's London, Singapore, Dubai that really are the global capitals of blockchain. That's unfortunate. Maybe our vacancy rate would be half of what it is here in San Francisco. It's 30%. It might have been 15% if we still were the global blockchain capital of the world. So that was a missed opportunity. It's really unfortunate. It hurt the city.
The latest with Ripple Labs action at the federal level is that you have objected to the SEC's request to appeal the original court ruling, which was positive for Ripple in the sense that it found the cryptocurrency XRP was not a security when it was sold to the public. Could you just explain what the latest is with that legal dispute?
Well, I think the bottom line is the SEC lost on everything that was important to them and important in regulation of the industry. The case still continues. There's appeal processes that everybody has the right to do. But we think that this is really groundbreaking. This is the law of the land. And it's actually quite good news, I think, I think the U.S. screwed up here on crypto and blockchain policy. this is the beginning now through the courts, unfortunately, instead
Yes.
of the regulators, to get that clarity and get us back in the
Well,
game.
there's kind of both happening in parallel. There's your situation with the SEC. Think about the applications pending for Bitcoin spot ETF. You know,
Yeah.
Gary Gensler and the SEC have both decisions to make on applications and fights that they are or are not willing to pick. How has that reflected on Gary Gensler, to your mind, as lead of that
Well, you bring
organization?
up a great point. You saw in the latest the challenge on the ETF, the Bitcoin ETF. Again, SEC lost, but not only that, the judge really admonished the SEC, really called them out in a way that you don't really see very often. I think it's just more proof that Gary Gensler's decision of sort of engaging this regulation by enforcement, rather than getting clear laws, he knows they're not clear. He just likes that lack of clarity so that he can go after anybody and make up the rules as he goes along through bullying. And that's not the American way. This should be a Congress. We should have clear rules.
Well, Chris, who says that they're behind America and not somebody else?
From the legislatures, not through these sort of unelected, power-hungry, and really misplaced decision makers that you see in Gary Gensler.
I'm the digital asset investor. I'm not an investment advisor. This is for entertainment purposes only. Please subscribe, hit the like button, and tell your friends and family that as far as I can tell, Gary and the crew is not looking out for the best interests of America. They're looking out for somebody else. Question's who? Thanks for listening.